Thank you for the state of Kuwait and the PPP unit of Kuwait for all the great work they are doing in this regard, for hosting not only this conference today, but I'm referring to all the hard work they are doing on amending legislation for it to be in line with best practices around the world, etc. So really delighted to see Kuwait pick up again on PPP. It has had a bit of difficulties in the past few years, but I'm confident now that it is on the right track. So we're looking forward to a lot of activity on the PPP from Kuwait. But I was asked to address more the international scene and what is going on. On that note, before I get to that, I would just say that it is unfortunate to see that in the World Bank report for the first half of 2021, we see that Latin America has increased its investment in PPP infrastructure by 84% in the first half of this year compared to the first half of last year. Of course, we had COVID, so all the figures were, the investments were very low. But we can see an excellent recovery at 84% in Latin America. Sub-Saharan Africa at 105%. We see Asia Pacific at 124%. Most remarkable is Central Asia at 279%. But unfortunately, we see the Middle East region, the Middle East, North Africa, down 59%. So we're hoping that the MENA region will marshal the strength again to focus more on PPP and get more involved with something that is happening around the world. That's because there's bound to be a lot of competition for PPP financing. Most governments around the world, as you all know, are running huge budget deficits. They have high indebtedness. So they're no longer able to invest in infrastructure, not only in the normal infrastructure they're supposed to invest in, but now with technological change, even if you have already existing infrastructure, you are obliged to update it. Anything from your road system to accommodate different kinds of transports and cars to, especially if countries want to meet their SDG targets, if they want to meet their climate change commitments, that requires a lot of retooling of the existing infrastructure away from what it used to be to new elements. Might be renewable energy, might be reverse osmosis in the case of desalination, might be using solar power for agriculture instead of electricity for pumping water, etc., etc. So there's a lot of investment that is required. Unfortunately, the impediments are still there. Some are pre-existing impediments; they've been there for a long time, but it is becoming more urgent to deal with them. One impediment is the availability of financing, as I mentioned, with the infrastructure financing gap between public treasuries availability and what infrastructure investment needs are, is in the tens of trillions of dollars, I believe. If we look at 2030 time horizon, we're talking about a deficit of about $30 trillion. These are huge amounts. The multilateral development banks are not going to be able to meet those needs. With all the money that the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and every other development bank can muster, they will not be able to meet those needs. So obviously, there needs to be more access to private financing in the capital markets. This poses a lot of challenges. There's a recent paper by N.J. Helmi at the Sorbonne University that says that when multilateral development banks contribute to a particular project, when they are involved in it, they crowd in financing from international investors from developed countries. However, their involvement with projects actually crowds out direct institutional investors from developing countries. This causes a problem, because what we need today more than ever is funding from the developing countries into the developing countries. It has to be South-South, because relying on investment from developed countries into developing countries is becoming more difficult, unless, of course, the PPP projects are prepared in such a way to meet ESG criteria for financing, and therefore then they hopefully can get access to a much wider context in capital markets, where now there is more than almost $35 trillion available for ESG projects. That then, well, before I get to that, of course, we always talk about creative financing. We always talk about Islamic financing, which are excellent for PPP, but unfortunately, we're not seeing any movement on that. And you might wonder why are we not seeing this movement? And from where I sit, I really think it is the responsibility of governments to take the lead. The private sector is not going to go and search for Islamic financing for a PPP project when all their competitors are not using that. They're not putting those conditions for a particular project that are needed to meet Sharia requirements. And so it is up to the government to say, this project, I've done my feasibility study. I think I can structure this in such a way to meet Sharia requirements, and therefore I'm going to ask for the financing to be Islamic financing. I think that governments, if they do that, if they do their homework well, they will find many, many opportunities, be it in Islamic financing or be it in ESG financing. That requires, in the case of ESG, as I was saying, it requires investment in project preparation. And project preparation is extremely difficult. It takes time. Politicians need to understand that projects cannot be, PPP projects are not the urgent projects they want to deliver. If a politician wants to make a promise to build an airport or build a power plant or whatever it is within the next 3 years, they should not use PPP. They need to understand that PPP projects need a year or two in just simply designing and developing before even tendering and before even construction. And this is because that requirement is becoming more and more important today to meet environmental standards, to meet social standards. And so project development needs to be given time. The other thing, this is one element of trust. So that's one element of trust. The other element of trust for investors is that there be no change in the regulations. Of course, political stability overall is important, security and all of these things, but also even at a more technical level, stability in the laws. And unfortunately, we've seen several Arab countries change their PPP laws regularly. And this needs to stop at some point in time, because you are never going to have the ideal law. I know that because I'm working at the United Nations now on developing a model PPP law, and we've gone through many iterations on this. I'm also involved with the World Bank development of their PPP law guidelines, and as well with the COP27 preparation of the African Green Investment Bank. So we need to make sure that there be stability in the legislative framework. What then becomes important is that the trust also exists not only from the investor side, but from the people side, because public relations have been almost a failure for PPP in many parts of the world. The stakeholders are not involved, society is not involved, governments usually think they know better, they know what is needed, they don't need to consult with the population. And the result is that people think that there's a lot of corruption going on. There's obviously, they're not happy with the project the way it is. It's not delivering what they need in the way they need it. So consultation with stakeholders becomes very important. Communication with stakeholders in terms of better understanding of PPP. Transparency, we all know, and I'm very delighted to have heard the Deputy Prime Minister, both the Deputy Prime Minister of Kuwait and the Minister of Public Works and Telecoms talk about this. Kuwait, obviously, the government of Kuwait is very aware of the need for transparency. When I was heading the PPP Council in Lebanon, I did something that I don't believe has been done before anywhere else in the world, but I highly recommend it, and that is to involve civil society organizations to come in and audit the work of the PPP unit. I opened the doors. I said that for every project we are working on, we're going to have a committee from the, in that case, the Lebanese Transparency Association, which is part of Transparency International. And for each project, they would form a committee from different organizations interested in transparency of government and best practices to audit the work. Obviously, Lebanon is not a very good example with all the corruption and everything that has taken place after that. But regardless, the practice itself, I believe, is excellent, and I do recommend it. So I think this is the context we are looking at. Investors are going to go to the projects or to the countries where they see real pipeline. So you need to develop a pipeline. Brazil, for example, just auctioned or tendered 10 airports in PPP. They have tendered multiple roads. Kazakhstan has done already 600 PPP projects, of course, many of them small. And so we need to build, in the Arab world, we need to build the pipelines. We need to tell investors what is coming down the road, even if we don't have 600 projects, even if we have 20 projects, but we need to tell them these are the projects, and they should not be pie in the sky. They should not be just a wish list. They need to be projects that where actually preparation is taking place, where investors are being consulted on the project development side, on the project design level, even before the project is tendered, even before, as part of the feasibility study. You'll be surprised how many investors are willing to participate and give their opinion and be helpful in that regard. The Arab world has many fantastic companies that are involved in PPP with a lot of experience. Kuwait itself has companies that are involved in PPP with a lot of experience. And so hopefully that the governments would start listening to those investors and at the same time communicating extensively and intensively with their public and public opinion, carrying out very elaborate or well-designed public relations campaigns to raise awareness about PPP and involve everybody in that process. It has to be a true partnership. It cannot be a partnership if it's only the government deciding what is to be done. I've finished my time. I will leave it there. Thank you very much for listening to me today.